Okay, I'd like to welcome you to the Literary Analysis Basics lecture. You've either missed it or you have to make it up for some reason, so here we go. Let's try to get some information about literary analysis so you know what you need to do for your tests and your projects. First of all, you have a notes outline. If you don't have the notes outline, you want to stop this lecture right now and go find the notes outline, because otherwise this isn't going to make much sense. If you need a new copy, I will have a link to it on my Edline page. Otherwise, you can get it out of your folder. Okay, so literary analysis is defined as the process of reading a text and examining the parts of it for deeper meanings. What the heck does deeper meanings mean? Well, it means that anytime you read a story or watch a movie or watch a TV show, that there's stuff going on that you understand just because it's happening. But there's also stuff going on underneath the surface. For example, if someone decides to throw a snowball at someone else, that's one thing happening. But why they threw the snowball at someone else is a deeper meaning. It might be that they have a crush on them and they're trying to flirt. Or maybe that they don't like them and they're trying to hurt them. But that's what we're looking for, is what is happening other than just what's going on in the story. So there are several things you need to know in order to analyze any piece of literature. We're going to start by talking about the basics. The first thing we're going to talk about is the title. The title of any book you read, any TV show you watch, any movie you watch, is your first impression of what's going on in the story. Authors choose their titles for a reason. They don't just grab something out of the air. And so it's up to you to figure out how the title connects to the novel. So let's take a look at some examples. For example, The Grapes of Wrath is from the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is a song. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. So this refers to that song. And it also refers to equality, because the song talks about equality among all people and God making everyone equal. So we can infer from that something in the book is going to deal with equality. Lord of the Flies is also a title, and that comes from a symbol in the novel. The Lord of the Flies is actually a symbol. It's a pig head on a stick, and he stands for Satan, but, you don't really need to know that, other than if you read the book, you know that that's an important piece. So keep in mind that your titles are important. All right, to correctly format a title for a work of literature, you should follow these rules. There are rules. You can do it right. You can also do it wrong. So longer pieces of work, novels, albums, newspapers, anthologies, which are groups of things, should be underlined or italicized to show that they are titles of those works. Underlining and italicizing is only used for longer pieces of work. For shorter pieces of work, short stories, song titles, newspaper articles, and poems, these should be put in quotation marks to show that they are titles. But you need to be careful and use the correct form, because if you don't format it correctly, I mark it wrong. So be careful when you format the title. Most of you are reading novels that are long enough to be underlined or italicized, so make sure that you do that when you write the title down. The second piece of information we're going to look at is the author. The author is the person who wrote the story, and his or her name is very important. Some authors use what's called a pseudonym, or a made-up name, to write certain novels. For example, a couple you may know, Stephen King is also Richard Bachman. Bet you didn't know that. Sherilyn Kenyon, who is one of my favorite authors, is also Kinley McGregor in another series. So authors don't always use their own names when they write. You need to pay attention to what's on the cover of your book, and that's what you need to include. So no matter under what name the author chooses to publish the novel, your job is to give appropriate credit by spelling the name correctly. That includes capitalizing where appropriate and making sure that you have the letters appropriately in the right order. If you spell it wrong, it's also marked wrong, so please be careful about that. The third thing we're going to talk about is the genre. That word is pronounced genre. The genre is the category of the novel. We study 2 genres of literature in this class, and since the class is called sci-fi and fantasy fiction, I bet you can guess which 2 genres we study. Obviously, science fiction and fantasy, right? Science fiction is fiction based on imagined future scientific or technological advances and major social or environmental changes, frequently portraying space or time travel or life on other planets. That's one genre that we study. The second genre that we study is fiction, or fantasy, Fantasy is fiction that commonly uses magic and other supernatural phenomenon as a primary plot element, theme, or setting. Many works within the genre take place within imaginary worlds where magic and magical creatures are common. So when you think of sci-fi, you would think of something like iRobot or The Matrix. And when you think of fantasy, you would think of something like Alice in Wonderland or The Hobbit. So regardless of which genre your novel falls into, you're also going to be asked to study a subgenre related to your novel. What's a subgenre? A subgenre is a category within a category. So for example, one subgenre is steampunk. It's in the category of fantasy. It's a subgenre of fantasy, and it deals with Victorian England and steam-powered machines. That's just one of the many subgenres that we study, and those are listed on your pink sheet inside your folder. So if you need to know what subgenre your novel is, you can look for it there. You need to pay attention to how your novel fits or does not fit the characteristics of the subgenre because, of course, it's going to come up on your test and in your project. And if you don't know, you can't answer those questions. So pay attention to how that novel relates to the genre. Okay. The fourth thing we're going to talk about is the characters. The characters are the people, the animals, the beings, or whoever lives in the novel. So it doesn't have to be just people. If you've ever read the Redwall series, that's populated by a bunch of mice and rats and shrews and all kinds of animals. Sometimes the beings are not human. Sometimes they're robots, such as in iRobot. Sometimes they're other kinds of beings. It doesn't really matter. But they are the people or the beings that inhabit the world. Characters can be divided up into types. There's 2 main types. The first one we're going to talk about is the protagonist. The protagonist is the main character and typically the person we're supposed to relate to in the novel. It's the person through whose eyes we see the novel and who solves the problem. So if you take a look at Little Red Riding Hood, the protagonist is Little Red Riding Hood because she's the one that we solve the problem with. If you take a look at The Matrix, the protagonist is Neo because he's the one that we follow and solve the problem with. The other character that we talk about is the antagonist, and that's not always a person either. The antagonist is a force or a character which acts against the protagonist. This is not always a bad guy. I know we're taught to think of the protagonist as the good guy and the antagonist as the bad guy, but that's not always true. What an antagonist is someone who wants something different than the protagonist wants. So please get out of the habit of thinking good guy, bad guy. All right, two more kinds of characters. Dynamic characters. Dynamic characters change or grow emotionally or spiritually, not physically. It's not talking age here. Or learn something throughout the novel. So, an antagonist is just as likely to be dynamic as a protagonist is. Antagonists learn lessons. Mr. Smith in The Matrix learns the lesson that the Matrix is not all powerful and he is not the be all and the end all. He didn't necessarily want to learn that lesson, but he learned it and he changed because of it. So he was a dynamic character even though he was an antagonist. Static characters, on the other hand, don't change or grow, emotionally or spiritually, not physically. Again, they can get older. They don't learn anything throughout the novel. A protagonist cannot be a static character, and the reason a protagonist cannot be a static character is because, by definition, a protagonist has to learn a lesson. So that is one definite in literary analysis. All right, the fifth thing we're going to talk about is the conflict. And we understand conflict pretty easy. It's the problem in the novel. Every novel has a problem. If it doesn't have a problem, then it's probably pretty boring. So we're going to talk about the two main types of conflict. There are two main types and lots of subtypes within them. The first main type is internal. The internal conflict happens within the character making a decision or following a belief. So the character has to decide something. Neo in The Matrix has to decide if he is going to be the one or if he is going to not be the one. That is an internal conflict within Neo. The second kind of conflict is an external conflict. That happens between the character and someone or something else. For example, two people fighting, surviving a storm, or trying to change society as a whole. The external conflict in The Matrix is between Neo and Mr. Smith, who wants to keep Neo from setting anything out in The Matrix. All right, I think we're going to stop this one for now. So if you have any questions for now, why don't you let me know in class and we will go from there. And thanks for paying attention, and we'll talk to you in class. Bye-bye.